Welcome back to On the Record. My guest again this week is UFO researcher John Lear. John, you say this documentary was put together in Florida recently, and it's some pretty stunning stuff.
Pensacola, Florida, and they've had all kinds of physicists and scientists look at the film. It's absolutely authentic. There is nothing fraudulent about it, and it's really interesting. I just can't I can understand why the networks didn't pick it up, because each one is controlled by a member of MJ-12.
That's quite a claim, but we're going to take a look at the film now and see if it's worth suppressing.
Things were very normal around the house. Just a normal evening. My wife says she's got to run to the store. Anyway, I'm sitting at my desk. Out the window, I noticed something, a glow. I got up and walked around outside and looked. It just didn't look like a helicopter or an airplane. I realized that it was not something normal. I thought of calling the police, and I said, well, I better take a picture first. I had no feelings I was going to be, hurt or anything. I took 4 shots and ran out of film, and again in my mind, take some more pictures. I ran back in, took the last package of Polaroid film out, opened up and crammed it in there, because the thing's flying around out there, get it quick. It either saw me or whatever, because it started coming. It altered its course. It started coming my direction.
That was November 11th, 1987, about 6 o'clock in the evening. A Gulf Breeze resident who insists on remaining anonymous took these photographs. Charlie and Doris Summerby say they saw the same thing that night over East Bay.
And suddenly, Dory said, "Look, what's that, Charlie?" I'll be damned. There were portholes. We saw portholes of light coming out of the portholes.
And over the next 3 months, many more pictures would be taken. By different people. And videotapes, too.
And I feel that there's absolutely no sign of a hoax, that the photographs are genuine, that the witnesses are telling the truth, and that this presents probably the best, without any doubt, the best photographic evidence in 40 years of UFO investigations.
As this series goes on, we see a lot more of that videotape evidence.
Yeah, there's 1 minute and 38 seconds of it, and it's
pretty interesting stuff. We've never seen that before, have we?
It's great. And on one morning, he goes out with his camera, and 3 of them show up, and he has a spectacular shot of 3 of them. And on one of the shots, they tip the saucer so that they can see up in the inside in the bright glowing ring of however it's powered.
Take it that's not a weather balloon. The government wouldn't contend it's a weather balloon.
No, that's for sure.
How does the government explain this, or has anyone ever put the question to them?
Nobody's put the question to them, because they've still got their stock response is the Air Force quit investigating UFOs in 1969.
What do you suppose that bunch wanted? They knew pictures were being taken of them. Why were they hanging around there?
It's got something to do with what's going on now, and I can't even fathom what's going on. But it shouldn't be too long before we find out.
A lot of stuff has happened in the interim between July 1947 and that incident we just saw. You were going to bring us up to date on.
I was going to tell you that a lot of Air Force pilots and planes have been, the pilots have been killed and the planes destroyed. The first one was the Thomas Mantell crash, January 7th, 1948. He was in a P-51 and he was chasing a flying saucer, ordered to chase one, and he got up to it and said, "Oh my God, it's huge," and that's the last thing they heard of him. 1948 was the second crash of a flying saucer near Aztec, New Mexico. 1950 was the third crash near Laredo, Texas, about 30 miles inside the Mexican border. 1952, we had 2 weekends in a row where the UFOs flew over the Capitol, Washington, D.C., buzzed the White House. Despite pictures and radar confirmations of the objects, the Air Force said it was a temperature inversion.
Now, did this ever make the newspaper back in 52?
It made all the newspapers, but it's been such a fantastic mental programming that we've been forced to forget this. It was in the papers. It was one of the most spectacular UFO events in history. 2 weekends in a row.
In the newspapers, I don't know if you've gone back and looked at the newspapers from that era, but how did the newspaper people explain what it was?
They told the Air Force line it was temperature inversion, but they had pictures of them. And it was just said it was temperature inversion.
And what happened after that? What's next?
The government established an intensive program of ridicule against anyone who said they saw flying saucers. And fear of ridicule was the foundation on which the cover-up was placed. Nobody likes to be ridiculed. And they built that fear into anybody so that nobody would talk about it. 1952, Eisenhower was elected. He was briefed by Hill and Cotter. Eisenhower, being military, took steps to ensure that the secret was kept. Because of his military background, he made it more military-oriented than, say, a civilian president would have. And it's this, I think, that has let his actions let the real power of the executive office slip through the hands of the president into MJ-12.
And we've got a copy of, I think, outside of that document where Eisenhower is briefed in that.
He was briefed, and he set it up. And interesting thing, in late 53 or early 54, Eisenhower witnessed an alien demonstration of technology and power at Muroc Dry Lake, which is now called Edwards Air Force Base.
How do you know that? How did you get that?
We have witnesses who were there.
Who say the president was there seeing?
The president was there. There's an English guy. He passed away. He either passed away just recently, but before he did, he was the last living person who was present at that meeting. And he said that Eisenhower told the aliens that the world was not ready for him. And nothing happened until the first part of the 60s. Several more crashed in the 50s. In 1960, Kennedy was elected. Eisenhower was the last president to have a full briefing on the alien problem. There was a disdain of elected officials throughout the intelligence and military communities, and they just didn't like elected officials. So every president since then has not had high enough clearance to know the whole problem. Now they know there's aliens, they know we've recovered saucers, and they know that we're trying to get technology. But there are certain other things which probably only about 25 people on the face of this earth know. Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenegger, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate, and they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time, and number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate. So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says, let's consider an event that could possibly happen in the future or may have already happened. But it did already happen, but what happened then?
I'm jumping ahead of you here, and we can backtrack a second, but the next president after Nixon, President Carter, I remember him as a candidate saying that one of the things he'd like to do when he got into office was to get to the bottom of this UFO stuff, to look into the Project Blue Book files, and to let people know, basically to open it up and let people know if it was a hoax, it's a hoax. If there's something more to it, but he never did that.
No, he said when he was during his campaign, he said, if I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one. But MJ-12 got to him, and they explained how important it was to keep it a secret. And apparently he agreed with him because we never heard anything from Carter.
Okay, what else? In between Nixon and Carter, anything?
The end of the 60s when then I believe we made a deal, 1973, 1980, were cattle mutilations. 14,000 cattle mutilations all over Canada, United States, South America, and we believe that they used the parts of the cattle for food or genetic experiments. And there was a documentary made by Linda Moulton Howe called Strange Harvest.
Okay, perhaps we can take a short break. When we come back, we can go to that because I think it's a little bit long. We'll be right back.